My name is Liz Lotus, and I'm a retired family physician slash hospice slash addiction medicine. So tonight I'm going to be talking about gardening. I have always been interested in gardening. I was born in Arkansas, and I used to garden with my great-grandmother, and then my grandmother, and then my mother, and then me and my son. So this year I finally fulfilled a dream, and I'm in the culinary or master gardener class at Ohio State Extension Agency. So to start off, why gardening? I always like quotes, and the first one is from Audrey Hepburn, who was one of the most hopeful people I've ever known. But she says, to plant a garden is to believe in tomorrow. And she was a UN ambassador of goodwill for the world. And Matisse, whom I love his paintings, said there's always flowers for those who want to see them. And one of the biggest gardeners we've ever had in the White House was Lady Bird Johnson. Where flowers bloom, so does hope. And finally, someone near and dear to our hearts, Hippocrates, let food be your medicine and medicine be your food. And so gardening can come in all shapes and sizes. It can be all flowers and waterfalls and rock gardens, or what we are more interested tonight is types of gardens that you can have in your own backyard. So this is sort of a multi-mix garden here, where they have in-ground raised beds, they have container gardenings against the wall. And so steps in planting your garden. The quote is always the right plant in the right place. So there are certain plants that do really well in Ohio and others that don't. Also consider what you want to eat, not necessarily what you can eat. And you also know where the location of your garden is going to be, in your backyard, in containers, how many hours of sunlight. For garden vegetables, mostly they need 6 to 8 hours, and shade for cool crops sometimes. Also, the amount of space sometimes for me gets bigger than what I can handle, because more space, the more time your garden will need. This is very non-judgmental. There are no gardening mistakes, just experiments. It's always good to keep a journal to record seeds and plants, where you put them, what were your successes and what were your experiences, and what was the production of the crops that you put in. So the first thing in planting a garden is knowing your soil. And here in Ohio, we have very clay soil. And soil is very hard to change, but doing a soil test will allow you to determine what type of soil, nutrients present or absent, need for organic matter, such as compost or other amendments, and doing it prior to planting is the best time. So you can get soil sample kits at the county extension office on Carmack Road, which is off of Kenny Road. And so they also have soil cores. So there's like a dibble that you dig down in, and you get a column of dirt, and you'll push that out, and you take multiple samples in different areas, and you let it dry, and then you package it up and send it off. And they're for free to check out at the extension office, or you can use a hand trowel. I apologize that this is hard to read, but Penn State does all of our soil samples, and they will send it back to you, and they will give you nutrient amounts. They will give you how much soil was clay, sandy, or loam. And they will also tell you, not nitrogen so much because it leaches out so rapidly, but two very important ones are phosphorus and potassium. And they also give recommendations on what type of fertilizer to put down and how many pounds per square foot, depending on the size of your garden. So really useful information. You can do soil samples from flower beds, from gardening beds, from your lawn. Most lawn services will provide this for you, but they don't give quite as much information. So here in Ohio, we are mostly in the clay region. We have a little bit of silt. If you're lucky, you'll have some loam. So there's good and bad to every corner of the triangle. So like in Florida, they're almost all sand. Loam you will find near river parts where there's been sediment that's washed up. So the reason clay soil, so people don't roll their eyes and think, oh, this is a terrible soil, it actually will hold on to your nutrients, and whatever you put on the ground as far as fertilizer will stay there. It doesn't tend to wash off with the rains. But the problem is because rain soaks it, you may need to amend it and lighten it up a little. Some people use peat, moss, other people dig in compost, anything to try to make it a little bit more porous. So gardening design, what appeals to your desires, because you're doing this for yourself, not for the neighborhood, not for your parents, just for you. And people have to make a decision. Do you want formal versus informal? Some people don't mind having not straight rows, and that's fine. There's no right or wrong. Do you want flowers or vegetables or a combination? And what do you want to get from your gardens? Do you want to have flowers that are harvestable that you could sell at a farmer's market? Do you want vegetables just for you or for you and your friends, you and your family? Fruit is really easy. Raspberries go incredibly easy here in Ohio, and blackberries. So this is a really formal garden. This is Versailles. So the French spent tons and tons of money making this perfect, and they have hundreds of groundskeepers who work on making it perfect. But here in Ohio, so we suggest making a garden design. So this would be sort of a combination rock garden, flower garden. And so each circle represents a type of plant. And so you make your drawing, you use a spray can like to circle out where it's going to be in your yard and put in the flowers. And so you would look to find the size of the flowers or the shrubs that you would put into a flower garden. But on the next slide, which is what hopefully we're looking more towards tonight, this would be a really good spring summer garden. So they have marigolds, tomatoes, arugula, sweet potatoes. And so this says a spring summer garden. So what you want to do is succession planting. So you would have another page that would have your fall garden. And so as the spring crops are dying out, you want to start sowing in plants further into the season. So you'll have a continual production throughout the entire season. So what is Ohio and what works here? So we are in hardiness zone 6A and 6B, but I have to say a little addendum to that. Because of climate change, we are gradually becoming warmer. So we have always had frost dates that are around the last of April, and our first frost date will be October 9th. Those are starting to change. And if you remember last year, we had a freak snowstorm in April that really wiped out a lot of people. You want to start cool weather crops inside because it'll allow you to plant them earlier outside. And when do you plant outside depends on the soil temperature. So for seeds sown in the ground, 50 degrees is the temperature for Ohio for really successful germination. Everyone has heard stories from their parents or from other people using folk knowledge. Don't plant anything outside till after Mother's Day. People have been burned by that. Or you need to plant your potatoes on St. Patrick's Day. But this has resulted in a lot of lost crops. So if you're in doubt about any of the hardiness zones or the last frost date or the first frost date, you can go to the Franklin County Extension Agency and they will have all the dates listed for you. So hydrangeas are a wonderful Ohio plant. They like basic soil. This is a plant you can change the color of the flower by making it more acidic or having it more basic, which will make, so one turns it blue and the other will turn it pink. I cheated, these flowers are from Oregon, so they're purple. It's very hard to get purple hydrangeas to grow in Ohio. Azaleas are a really pain to grow in Ohio. They need extremely acidic soil. Ohio soil is usually about 6.8 up to 7.4. Azaleas need something around 5 pH in order to thrive. Another plant that needs really acidic soil are blueberries. So if you want to grow blueberries, my suggestion would be grow them in a container where you can really control the pH of the soil that they're in, and then you'll have a good output of fruit. So into the types of plants. So native plants are plants that have formed a symbiotic relationship over thousands of years with the wildlife that's in our area, and it offers a more sustainable habitat for virtually all animals, whether it's providing nectar for bees, butterflies, moths, hummingbirds, shelter for mammals, seeds for birds, and they can distribute them. And then there are what we call non-native plants, which usually are hybridized cultivators, meaning they've been bred to enhance the color, the foliage qualities, the flower size, like those humongous hibiscus you see. Those have been hybridized so much so that you have like a dinner plate size flower, or culinary and cultural attributes. So in many cases for our vegetables, the non-native ones have good resistance to all kinds of diseases and that are here in Ohio. And I'll talk about that more when you look at a seed packet. The bad players are the invasives. So these are non-native, but they are able to establish on many sites. They grow extremely fast, and they are spreading to the point of disturbing ecosystems. So, and they've usually been brought here by someone who saw them in another country and they said, oh, that's such a pretty flower. Water hyacinths is a really good example. They have taken over a lot of waterways in Florida and they are native to Asia, and someone brought one back in their suitcase. And so now they are choking out the sunlight, which is killing a lot of the native seagrasses that the manatees live on. So these are some native examples: black-eyed Susans, butterfly weed, cardinal flower, New England aster, and cone flowers. There's an absolutely outstanding native species garden up in Delaware called Scioto Gardens. You can go there now, but you have to make an appointment. They will be open full-time starting in April. And if they don't have it, they are wonderful to work with to try to find a native species if you would like. So the non-natives, so there are thousands in Ohio, and you can buy them at all the garden centers, Lowe's, Home Depot, and Menards. The problem with some non-natives, and I really want to caution people, is they may not need pollinators, or if they do cross-pollinate, they may reduce fruit production among the natives, or they may outcompete other plants. Cultivars, as I said, are bred for disease resistant. Some of them are GMOs, such as Roundup Ready. This was developed for soybean and corn farmers, so the corn itself was genetically modified to be insensitive to Roundup. So you can plant these crops and then they spray Roundup, and it's not going to kill the plant crop, but it will kill all the other weeds. And they also lend themselves to higher yields and aesthetics. So it's not a good, bad, evil, good. It's just, you have to know the origin of your seeds or your plants. And most people have a combination of native, non-native. You definitely don't want to have invasive. So this is a sunflower. I grow them every year. And it wasn't until I took this master gardening class, all the sunflowers I were growing were self-pollinators. So they did not attract bees. So when you pick up a packet of sunflowers, you need to read if it's a self-pollinator or a cross-pollinator, because the bees and the hummingbirds and anyone who wants to have pollen will not come to a non-pollinator. And so this year I've changed all my sunflower selections. Okay. So we have a lot of invasive plants in Ohio: Japanese knotwood, garlic mustard, Asian bittersweet, Russian olive, tree of heaven, which has a beautiful blossom, which is why someone brought home a twig of it, and it outcompetes everything. The Calorary Bradford pear has been planted immensely within urban centers, along roadways, Grandview, along Cambridge Avenue. They have a whole stand of Bradford pears. They are no longer, Ohio has just put them on the invasive list, and by 2023, you will no longer be able to purchase Bradford pears. Cities and counties are working really hard to remove them. If you go to any exit ramp off of 315 or some of the 71 exit ramps, they are just filled with Calorary pears. And they have no natural enemy. They will grow really great for about 15 years, but they have a very narrow fork in their branches, and it weakens them and they will fall over. So they have outcompeted a lot of pears, and they also will cross-pollinate with the pears that are grown for fruit production and destroy the fruit. So not a good, it was thought to be a good one, but not good. So pollinator plants. So these were some of the pollinators I grew in my garden last year. Zinnias, black-eyed Susans, there's some cosmos back there. So you can see I'm a messy gardener. I sort of let live and let live, and you can buy pollinator packs too. So why do we want to attract pollinators? They are having an extremely rough go with herbicides, pesticides, loss of their livable habitat. So we're trying to encourage pollinators in our world. So hummingbirds are one. These are some bees and moths. And so these are also ones, the majority of bees in Ohio are what we call solitary bees that live in the ground or in wood piles. Only honeybees tend to be true colonizers. Bumblebees live in the ground. This is a swallowtail butterfly native to Ohio, loves butterfly bush. And this is the blue swallowtail, also native. It loves milkweed. So there's all kinds of information. The Xerces Society is named for the first moth to become extinct in North America. And there is a pollinator partnership that has information. There's an Ohio State Bee Lab. They have great handouts on pollinator plants. And also Ohio State fact sheets. You go to extension.osu.edu, and ENT stands for entomology, and 47, 82, and 80 are all ones concerning pollinators. So what kind of garden are you going to have? There's advantages and disadvantages to everything. In-ground allows for large production plots, but not necessarily more produce, and they have higher maintenance needs in terms of water, fertilizing, and weeding. Raised beds warm up earlier. They're easier to irrigate. It allows for you to have more intensive production. You can use row covers to start earlier and continue later in the season. They're easier to weed, thin, and harvest. Containers work really well for people who have restrictive homeowners association. They're very easy maintenance. They use even less water, and they're easy to manage soil quality. So this would be just an in-ground, which is what I did for many years, but you can see the big, you can see the rows and then the space in between them. So unless you mulch, you're going to have to be weeding quite a lot. And the poles are set up for pole beans or peas or zucchini or squash, whatever climbing vine you want. So raised beds can come in all shapes and sizes. You can use cement blocks, and you can use the corners and to put like herbs or smaller plants. So you use every bit of space that's in there. It's a pretty cheap way, but they're pretty heavy to get in place. Water tanks have become very popular. You can go to Farm Tractor Supply. If you order a lot, they'll deliver them for free. You punch some holes in the bottom for irrigation, put down cardboard, wood chips, and then soil, so it's not completely filled up. Usually 6 to 12 inches is all the soil you'll need for taproots, plants like tomatoes. Wood is the old standard. And you want to use landscape wood on this because they will rot after a period of time. And they sell pre-made ones that you assemble, and they're pretty easy, and you can find them on Amazon, you can find them at Lowe's, you can also find building plans for them online. These are one of my favorites. This is called a trug, and it's a V-shaped container, so the taproot goes down in the middle. They are somewhat movable, and again, you have less soil requirement, and you can control it and irrigate less. So containers, so they're made out of felt, and they fold up, so you can empty them in the wintertime, and they're very light. And so if you want to move them onto your patio, particularly for something that's delicate, like some herbs like basil, and you want to keep it up close to the house so the deer don't have a field day with it. Very good for herbs, flowers, cherry tomatoes, and they come in all different sizes. You can order them on Amazon, you can order them from seed companies, and I find them really useful. And this is a little strawberry box that is really easy to make if you're handy. I'm not that handy anymore, but there are lots of plans online that you can find. And so you would just plant strawberries and let them cascade over the side. Okay. So seeds. What you want to do is you want to read the seed packet, and you want to see there's a lot of information on the front side. When on the right, it will tell you how many days till it's ready to pick. And there also will tell you what kind of soil, if it's a bush or climbing. So these are green beans. And green beans are kind of high maintenance in the old style, but the new style are bush beans, so they don't need a trellis or support. And then on the back of it is really good information that hopefully you'll see this better when you pull up the slides, but they will tell you how many days from planting to germination, what diseases they have been bred to resist, such as wilt or blight. And they will also tell you how deep to plant the seed and how far to space them apart. And they list the zone that you are in, when it would be safe for you to plant them. A lot of people sort of glaze over and they see all these beautiful pictures of seeds and they're like, oh, I want to buy everything. And you sort of have to restrain yourself, because like me, I would buy every seed there and try and do it. And I don't have the space or time for it. So wealth of information on there. So you want to, if you're planting them in rows, you can put a board down and you can space them. There are seed planters. But you want 3 times the width of the seed is how deep that you want to plant it. So it's really hard, but when you plant seeds in the ground outside, you really are going to have to thin them out, because if you leave them all in there, and it's just painful for me as a lot of gardeners, but if you're picking them out, you're killing these little plants. They do not regerminate, or they cannot be transplanted because they're so spindly. But if you thin them out, then you're going to have some very strong plants. So starting seeds. So I don't know how well you can see me, but I buy these little packets like this. And I have a seed starting tray, which usually is just like the box that you get at the lawn and garden store. And then you want a plastic top to create your own little greenhouse inside. And then I use what's called a seed harvest map or seed heating map. You can buy these on Amazon, and they need warmth, light, and moisture to germinate. And the other thing you want to do, it costs a little bit more, but you want to buy a seed starting soil, because it has extra potassium and phosphorus in it for root formation, which is what you really want to do when you start your seeds. And the first few years, I didn't have seed heating pads. I used an electric blanket and I put a sheet of plastic over it. And I had a grow light and I put plastic around it. So I created my own little hothouse. And that works well too. Like I said, there's no mistakes, just experiments. If you're sowing directly into the ground, you need to make sure that you keep them watered. We usually don't have that problem here in Ohio because we get tons of rain. And if they're young seedlings, sometimes you have to protect them by putting a row cover over them. Transplants. So some seeds are easy to start, like I start kale, spinach, peas, broccoli, and cauliflower. Those are all cold seasons. And I start them back in January. So they're getting ready to move outside. Other ones you can buy transplants. And this is what a lot of people do. And you want to select really healthy transplants. And you can mix and match flats. So you don't, just because they come in a flat doesn't mean you have to have every plant in the flat. So they're used to people doing that. And what you want to do, you want to read the plant tag. So like the seeds, they have all kinds of information on there. They'll tell you how deep to plant it, how much sunlight they're going to need, how much watering. And on the back, it'll tell you what cultivar this is, what it might be resistant to, what are its fertilizer requirements, pretty much more than you've ever wanted. But it's really helpful, like everything in medicine, you have to read before you give someone a drug, the same way with plants. So when you go to the garden store to buy your transplants, pull the plant out of the pot. Make sure it has good root structure, because if it's root bound, you're going to have, you can separate the roots, but they are so spindly at that stage that they will break. If there are no roots, then you don't want to buy that. So that's what I mean about pick and choose, particularly like if you're buying, a flat of tomato plants. You want it to have good growth, but more important, you want it to have good root system. So irrigation. There's a few simple rules. You never want to water at the top of the plant because it will cause wilt and viruses. You want to water down by the roots. You want to water early in the morning because you'll have better absorption and less evaporation. Never water in the evening, even though it's convenient for people who are working. They're like, oh, I think I'll go out and water, because then you encourage mold to develop in your plants. And it's much better to water slow and steady. Soaker hoses are great. Timers are cheap. There are a lot of ways you can get around this. You can punch a hole in the bottom of a milk jug, fill it full of water and set it next to the plant, or a 5-gallon bucket. Drip irrigation is costly, but it's very efficient because you can set the daily time, the rate, and the duration. So after 20 years of gardening, 4 years ago, I invested in drip irrigation. So these are what they call emitters, the ones on the left. Mine are more like the ones on the far right corner, where it just drips the water down. It comes on every morning at 6 a.m. It waters for 5 minutes, and then it goes off. If we're having a really drought time here in Ohio, then I can increase the time to 10 minutes. But it really conserves water, which is a very precious resource. So always want to keep in mind to be conservation. Mulch. Mulch is a fighting word among gardeners. So you can use landscape fabric. There's less evaporation. You can use wood chips, which will eventually break down into compost. If you have a truck, Asplund will give you all the wood chips you can haul away. Black plastic is also used a lot for weed control, but you have to watch the soil temperature because it can heat up the soil extremely high. Straw is cheap, but it may introduce a lot of weeds that you never even had. And you have to have weed control. The cheapest is to go out and pull your weeds in the morning, because they will draw nutrients from the soil that should be going to your plant. So on the left is black plastic mulch. So you cut a hole where your plant's going to go, you put it in there, push the soil back on it. And then on the right, you have straw mulch. And I used straw mulch for a couple of years, and I'm still paying the price because I have cockleburs and things that have never shown up in Clintonville, but they came in on my straw. Fertilizer. So you should apply fertilizer based on your soil results. And I didn't put a dash, I put the dash in the wrong place. But NPK is what you'll see on the side of fertilizers. And that is the ratio of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Nitrogen helps with leaf production, and it's the one that leaves the soil most rapidly. One way you can ensure nitrogen is to plant what we call a cover crop, like clover, after your growing season, and let it grow in the fall. You can also use ryegrass, and then come spring, dig it under, and it will release all the nitrogen from the leaves on that plant. Phosphorus is simulating root growth, and it will also help set buds and the overall vitality. The most important nutrient that you want for seeds, starting them or when you first put them in the garden. And then potassium just helps overall. It really helps with carbohydrate making and disease resistance. So it's a dizzying array when you go to get fertilizer. A typical vegetable garden is a ratio of 3:1:2, 6:2:4, or 9:3:6. You want to be very aware that lawn fertilizer also comes in a 3:1:2. But you do not ever want to use it on gardens, because they add in a lot of other things like grub control and pesticide and herbicide controls. So, and then there's a whole discussion, organic versus inorganic. And just my non-biased opinion, nitrogen is nitrogen, potassium is potassium, phosphorus is phosphorus. So you can use fish emulsion, which a lot of people like to use. It doesn't smell great, but you have to use a lot more of any organic fertilizer than you would of the synthetic ones. So I leave it to your wisdom of what path you want to go down. So one thing that I have learned in the last few months is integrated pest management. So instead of just reaching for an insecticide or a pesticide or an herbicide, use a physical means, pick off bugs or tomato worms manually, spray them off with a stream of water. These are really cheap and they won't hurt the environment, and it's a good starting place. The next is doing planting that will ward off bugs. So if you grow marigolds, basil, nasturtiums, or candulas by your tomatoes or other vegetables, there is a scent within those plants that insects find very noxious. And if they smell it, they won't come. And it works really well. My great grandmother used to plant marigolds and nasturtiums everywhere. And I thought, oh, that's pretty. And she says, no, Elizabeth Ann, this is to keep the bugs away. And it did a really good job. Barriers. So barriers are really good for things like slugs. People say, oh, just put a dish of beer out there. My dogs like beer. So this is really probably not the best. Some people put crushed chalk because it's very thorny to slugs as they try to go along, or you can just put a plastic edging or take a can and just cut it in half and put it there. So the last one is insecticides. Always read the instructions. Granular will be taken up by the plant, but on a very slow basis, and you'll lose anywhere from a quarter to a half of it with rain. Liquid works very well on the plant, and something you need to read on any label for insecticides, it's something called days before picking after application. So if you're spraying or applying insecticide, you will be given like 7 days, 10 days, 14 days, and you cannot pick your produce till after that time has elapsed. So it's not taken up by the fruit, or it's already exhausted, so you won't be eating your herbicides and pesticides. So these are some common ones. So the one on the left is, it's called Serenade, but it fights against Bacillus subtilis, which is a disease that hits tomato plants. Sulfur is really no longer used. It's not a good thing to put out on your garden. Neem oil is organic, and it's very good for spraying on trees that have bagworms or gall that you have on trees, and it can also be used on vegetable gardens. So Dipel, these are all ones for insecticide. The one in the middle is a sesame seed oil formulation for nematodes. We have a horrific amount of nematodes. If you ever get up one morning and you see your garden or your lawn dug up, it's skunks and raccoons who've come to dig up your nematodes and eat. And then they have insecticidal spray, which is really very not noxious and works really well for a lot of pests. Okay. So harvesting. There's always a good time to harvest. Pick early in the morning because the vegetables will have the highest water content. And you want to put them in clean containers that have been washed out. When you wash your produce, you only want it in water 10 degrees of the produce temperature. So you can guess, we've touched enough people in our lives, we know what 98 feels like. So don't bring in an eggplant that's been sitting and baking for the last 5 weeks and put it in ice cold water. It will degrade the fruit. If you share your produce with family and friends, be very upfront about what was used in the growing of your produce. If you buy produce at a farmer's market or a CSA, a community sustainable agriculture, ask them how their produce was grown, and they should be able to tell you. It's important. The United States has now adopted good agricultural practices, and this came about because of all the foodborne illnesses. And most of it did not occur picking in the fields. It did not occur with harvesting or with when it was first washed at the plant. Oddly enough, most of it occurs when people bring home like bagged lettuce and they don't wash it because it says pre-washed. I recommend washing everything. And some of the farmers at the farmers market will have a sign that says they are a GAPS certified grower, meaning they practice good agricultural practices. So these are lovely snow peas or sugar snap peas. And so you don't want to pick them all at once. You want to do stages of picking through the season, and the same with tomatoes, except at the end of the season, you can pick green tomatoes. I love fried green tomatoes. Or some people pick them and then chop them up and turn them into salsa, but try not to let anything go to waste. I do want to back up one thing. If you have a diseased plant in your garden, take the whole plant out. Do not compost it. You need to put it in a paper bag and throw it away. Really important. So these are some of the sources. I always try to encourage people to use EDU sources, whether from Cornell, Ohio State, or Michigan State. So the first one, first two are Ohio State's, and then the third one, bygl.edu, is also Ohio State, and it's just a wealth of information. Cornell, the Ohio DNR also has some really great handouts, and just extension.osu.edu. And then I have just a few other slides, if Lisa would switch over. Wildlife. This is the bane of my existence. So this was this winter. This was last week. So I live right next to the Olentangy River. And these guys only used to come across in the evening, but now they come over about 9 o'clock in the morning. They sort of graze up and down the street. They're sort of like Canada geese. They just want you to stop for them. And they will eat everything. So, and you probably will have trouble with all other kinds of wildlife, chipmunks, squirrels, and that's where the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, they have a hotline and all kinds of good handouts. So what I learned, so this is my garden. I have 2 rows of fencing. Deer have no depth perception, so they can dead jump from just standing still to 8 feet. It is not a problem. These are cattle panels and they are 6 feet tall. And then I have a pig panel next to them, which is 4 feet tall with a gap in between them. So they never have jumped in here. This is after 6 years of trial and error of feeding probably half of Franklin County's deer. So I use cold frames. So underneath this one are my strawberries and the one on the left are my herbs. So I can uncover them as the days are getting longer. The herbs I've been sampling all through the winter. So thyme, marjoram, some parsley. I'm trying to think. Those do really good sage overwintering. Basil and dill are too delicate, so they won't. So this is a company I order from. They have free shipping, and I'm not on paid staff for Johnny's Seeds, but they also have a lot of good information about planting. There's nothing wrong with Burpee. I also buy seeds from Burpee. I also buy seeds at the dollar store. So I'm not a seed snob, but Johnny Seeds has a guarantee on their seeds. So this is a handout for free from the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. And it's a publication that lists all the backyard butterflies in Ohio and the moths and, techniques for enticing them into your neighborhood. This is a common bee identifier that's also available for free at Ohio State. And it lists not just your honeybees. The honeybees are having a real struggle. I don't know how many of you are aware that 2 years ago, there was a colony collapse disorder that destroyed almost 75% of honeybees nationwide. So it's been a long haul back, but remember also that bumblebees and moths, all kinds of people are pollinators. So how about questions?
We have a question.
Yes.
So we do, this is Diana, we do a pepper garden with usually about 25 varieties of hot peppers, and we harvest between 4,000 and 5,000 peppers every season. And in the winter, we've been putting ryegrass down. And there is some debate amongst the family as to what to do in the spring with the ryegrass. Do you till it in? If you till it in, how long do you let it set before you then start planting? Do you know the answer to that, Liz?
Well, I can give you what I've learned. I don't till anything. Tilling disturbs up earthworm abodes. So I do like a double turn with just a spade or a shovel. So it's not quite as traumatic as tilling. I till it and then I will plant a week later because it doesn't take that long for the nitrogen to be released from the rye stalk. You don't have to worry about the roots. They're not going to give you anything, but it's the green stems and they break down fairly rapidly. And it's not like other manure. It's not ever hot. So you don't have to let it, it's going to be a slow release. So that's what I would do. Usually I'll either do a spading. Yeah, but that's actually what I always do is the spading. Tilling is really disruptive to the soil topography. That's why farmers are almost all no-till now, because it really does disrupt important things in the soil.
And do you have a preference over a ryegrass or clover?
So it depends on how much nitrogen you want. Clover is in the legume family, so it fixates nitrogen within its root system, in addition to the chlorophyll that will release nitrogen from the plant. So I generally put in red or white clover in the fall, just because it seems to give a little more kick for your dollar. You really only need to soil test every 3 years. But if you're really, really curious, you can send it off and see what your nitrogen level is. But I've noticed I get better results with clover.
Thanks, Liz.
Great question.
Really informative.
And AeroGardens. Someone asked about AeroGardens, which I think is amazing. They are awesome. They don't use the soil, and it's even more concentrated on use of extra products as far as fertilizer and water, and all those things are conserved. So I'm very much in favor of them. It's technically a little more challenging. So I'm sorry, Barbara.
Oh, go ahead, Tony.
Hi, thanks. This was a great talk and really good review. In the old days, when I used to have big vegetable garden, we would use rotenone, which was an old kind of insecticide that acted, I think, as a physical problem, rather than being absorbed by the plants or the insects. Is that something people use anymore?
Yes, so it's diatomaceous earth is what it really is. So it's chunks of, diatoms that have been collected and pulverized. So when the plant or when the bugs eat it, it causes internal bleeding and they bleed out and die. So it is still used. It has gotten pricier as the years have gone by, but it's really good to use. A cheaper layman's thing that I did, I used to teach school, and I would take old chalk comb from school and crush it and pulverize it and spread it around.
Wow. Okay. All right. Thank you.
I want to make one plug. So Master Gardeners man a Master Gardener hotline. So you can call the Columbus or the Franklin County Extension Agency and ask for the Master Gardener hotline. And one of 60 lovely people like me will answer and try to find, if we don't have the answer right away, we will try to find research and get back to you with the answer. All the extension agents are so knowledgeable. I don't know how many people read the column on Sunday Mike Hogan writes. He is our Franklin County Extension agent and just a wonderful, wonderful person and a wealth of knowledge. If any of you have time in the future, when you retire, I highly suggest taking the Master Gardener if you want to get more into it. You just learn all this great plant physiology, botany, entomology, agronomy, all these things that I had forgotten from my undergrad biology degree. So, going back 45 years, the brain cells did fire. So, and I will also put some more resources on the website of places to get plants and information. I really appreciate everyone. Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you. It was fabulous. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Liz.
This was great. It's actually wonderful. Quite wonderful.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Perfect.
Thank
you.
Night.
Hey, can I ask one more quick question of you?
You betcha.
That cute little wooden strawberry planter that was tiered.
Yes.
Is that intended to have strawberry plants stay in there and winter over? Or do you have to replant them every year?
No, so strawberry plants have a survival of about 3 to 5 years, and then they sort of burn out and you have to put in new ones. But what I would suggest with that one is throw a cover over it, like I have this white winter cover, or you could throw some visqueen over it, or you could wheel it into your garage for the winter. But yeah, they need to be protected from a hard freeze.
Thanks so much, Liz.
Thank
Congratulations.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Liz.
you.
Yeah.
That's great.
Good
Thank you
night.
very much.
Night.
Good
Thank
night.
you.